Hello and welcome to the Connecting Communities podcast. My name is Caitlin and I'm the Communications Coordinator for MassHire Metro North Workforce Board. Our organization is dedicated to developing partnerships, generating resources, and advocating for solutions that result in a skilled workforce, prospering businesses, and access to meaningful career pathways for local residents. On this show, we share workforce development stories by speaking with members of our communities who believe in the power of quality employment. Sitting down with us today is Senator Jake Oliveira. Jake was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 2020 and served the 7th Hampton District before being elected to the State Senate in 2022. In the Senate, he is the chair of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development and vice chair of the Joint Committee on Election Laws. Jake has also served as the Assistant Executive Officer of the Massachusetts State Universities Council of Presidents, where he played a key role in renaming 7 state colleges to state universities. In 2019, he was recognized as one of Business West's 40 Under 40. Welcome, Senator Oliveira, and thank you for being here.
Happy to be here, Caitlin. And, that 40 under 40, I'm clinging on to dear life, being under 40. But by this time next year, I'm going to be cresting over that threshold.
Well, thank you so much for being here again. I'm really grateful. I know you're a busy guy, so it's appreciated, and I'm excited for the conversation. To kind of kick things off, I'd love to just have you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your story and, what led you to your current role.
Great. Well, thank you again, Caitlin, for putting this together. And I'm excited to be here to share a little bit about the work that we're doing in the Labor and Workforce Development Committee and the responsibilities that the committee has, and also some of the other interesting aspects and boards that I'm able to sit on, and some of the work that the legislature is doing this session to address our workforce challenges, and also great opportunities that we have throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But as you mentioned before, I'm in my second term as a state senator. I served one term in the Massachusetts House of Representatives before jumping ship to the Senate side. They always say when a House member leaves the House and joins the Senate, the collective intelligence of both chambers goes up. But it is really an honor to represent 12 communities in Western Massachusetts, including the largest community in Western Massachusetts, the city of Springfield, which is a great economic driver for our region. But my story and background getting to the legislature and chairing the Labor and Workforce Development Committee really is rooted in my family's history and my family's story and the challenges that my family faced when I was younger, and some of the opportunities that they were able to take advantage of to help them get ahead and help our family do some good work. So prior to joining the legislature, my day job working for the state universities, I did for 12 years, but I also served for 16 years as a local government elected official, 12 years as a school committee member in my hometown of Ludlow, and 4 years as a representative town meeting member. So this past March, I actually celebrated my 20-year anniversary in an elective office, which is kind of exciting and a little scary that I've been at this for more than 2 decades now. But, public service is kind of baked in my family's history, but also, giving back to the community that's given me so much. Both of my parents, when I was younger, at one point in their careers, found themselves unemployed, where they relied on the unemployment system that we have here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and having jurisdiction over the unemployment service, working with the Department of Labor and Workforce Development and Secretary Jones. It's a particular passion of mine to make sure that we have a solvent unemployment account. But also, my parents took advantage of some changes in their careers. So when I was about 8 years old, my dad lost his job working for an engineering company in Connecticut for 25 years. And he was laid off and was out of work for about a year and a half, but he used that time to actually go back to school and use his severance pay to get his master's in education. He had already achieved an MBA beforehand, so he got his second master's in education and fulfilled his lifelong dream of becoming a high school teacher. He became a high school math teacher, so he changed careers in his late 40s, which, wasn't always easy for the family. My mom was working full time at the time, and he was working for 25 years in this engineering company. And with kind of the mini recessions that hit in the early 1990s, he used it as an opportunity to change careers and pursue something that he always wanted to pursue, which was getting into the classroom. He taught high school CCD catechism for many decades before he became an actual classroom teacher. And in fact, at 77 years old, he just retired this year. So he was one of the oldest teachers in the Ludlow public schools, the school system that I went through. Never had him as a teacher, thank God. We probably would have killed each other. At one point, the guidance department did put me in his math class, and both of us went separately to the guidance department to get us out of each other's way. But it was nice having a dad in the school, and really seeing my dad, mid-career, changing very, very rapidly to a different profession, and saying that even in your late 40s, you can reinvent yourself and pursue those dreams. Unfortunately, a couple years later, my mom's company that she worked for over 2 decades closed. And so she was left unemployed, and then used that as an opportunity to begin working for a college out in Western Massachusetts, Western New England University. It was college at the time. But she made a mid-career change as well, kind of a little bit later on in her career. Now, having both of them retired, and as baby boomers, we see that kind of bubble of baby boomers leaving the workforce, there's a serious need to make sure that we invest in workforce training, and also to give opportunities for people like them who found themselves unemployed later in their careers, and giving them the opportunities to switch professions and pursue something that they wanted to do. Was really baked into the cake with me as a child. But we were able to get by pretty well afterwards with, the help of unemployment and with the career changes, and, gave me the opportunity to attend Framingham State University, my alma mater, and gave me a lifelong passion for public higher education, which plays such an important role for our workforce. Everybody talks about in Massachusetts our wonderful, prestigious private institutions like Harvard and MIT and BU and BC and Tufts. But the public university system, our state colleges and universities, our community colleges, are really the economic backbone of Massachusetts. 80% of graduates of public higher education don't move away from Massachusetts. They stay right here. They are employed right here. They get jobs right here. So investing in our public higher education system is definitely a passion of mine, because it kind of couples that workforce development and training programs with our excellent reputation for education here in the Commonwealth. And obviously, my 12 years on the school committee and being president of the School Committee Association and on the national school boards, that is a point of pride for us here in Massachusetts, and utilizing those strengths and building upon it can really, really, really impact our economic future.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. It's clear that you're really passionate about these issues, and the people it can impact anyone, especially when it impacts people you care about. I think it can drive you to want to change things. And I can also relate to having parents as teachers. I come from a huge family of teachers, and I did have my father as a teacher in high school.
You did? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What did he teach?
AP English.
AP English. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I would have
Yeah.
enjoyed that more than any type of honors or AP math. I prefer English over that.
Yeah, me too. I'd love if you could describe the efforts of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development a little bit more and share, what its main priorities are.
Yeah. So in the legislature, a lot of our work is done through the committee process. So there are nearly 7,000 bills filed every legislative session. And we run on a 2-year cycle that started this past January on January 1st and will go till January of 2027. And so during that 2-year period, members like me file bills to try to improve the lives of people in the Commonwealth. I myself, I think, have filed close to 80 bills this session, and each one of those bills are assigned to a committee of jurisdiction. So our committee, the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, deals with any type of employment law, any changes in regulations when it comes to labor relations, any changes on workforce development, workforce protections, workforce trainings. All of that are in the jurisdiction of the Labor and Workforce Committee. And we have a few hundred bills in our committee this session. So it is a significant number of bills that are before the committee. And a lot of times out of those 7,000 bills, most of them are refiles. There's only, so much time in a legislative session to pass legislation. And so only a handful of bills get over the finish line each session. So a lot of bills are refiled over and over again. And so what you see in the committee process are bills that have been filed in previous sessions, but also new bills. And I'm proud to say that there's nearly 80 new bills before the committee, which is a significant number of bills, everything having to do with standards for workforce, so people that might work in cold or extreme heat, in providing protections for workers that are working in those types of environments, mandatory breaks, water, those types of things. Bills like that come before our committee, and we begin the process of having a public hearing on each one of those hundreds of bills before the committee. And so we've had about 4 committee hearings so far. We're actually having another committee hearing next week. And the unique thing about Massachusetts, unlike the federal level, which you have to be invited to testify before a committee, in Massachusetts, our committees are open to the public, and you can participate if you have a passion about a certain piece of legislation or a change. You can come to the State House and provide testimony on the bill, or you can do what we're doing right now, which is Zoom in or Teams into a committee hearing and provide your testimony, which is a great equalizer, particularly for my constituents in Western Massachusetts, when sometimes it can take hours to get to the State House to give testimony. So opening this up and having a remote ability to testify before committees has really been a game changer, and really has opened up the opportunities for residents of Massachusetts to participate in the committee process, which is exciting. We're also one of the few states in the country that allows any citizen to petition their rep or senator to file a bill on their behalf. So we have those bills in Massachusetts as well, which is kind of an exciting thing to have. You don't have to wait for a legislator to draft legislation. You can, send it to your rep or senator, and they'll be forced to file it. But it's always nice to have their support anyways, and getting them to file it as one of their bills. So the committee this session is really focusing in on making sure that we look at changes at the federal level and prioritize worker protections for the residents of the Commonwealth. We also need to deal with the issue of solvency of unemployment insurance. The trust fund that is created that provides the benefits for unemployment, which is paid by employers here in the Commonwealth, is set to run out of funding. And so we need to make some reforms and find a way to replenish the dollars in that account this session. And so I've been working and meeting with stakeholders to make sure that residents of the Commonwealth, if they become unemployed, have access to a reliable, steady, and efficient unemployment system. And that's one of my goals this session.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. For listeners who don't know, last month, the Senate joined the House in passing a transformative $1.39 billion supplemental budget funded by revenue from the Fair Share surtax, a voter-approved 4% tax on annual incomes exceeding $1 million, specifically dedicated to education and transportation. So I'd love to focus on both these two topics a little bit. Part of this budget includes a $535 million allocation for the MBTA, with funds set aside for infrastructure upgrades, workforce development, and safety improvements. And it also includes a $73 million allocation for regional transit authorities, or RTAs, supporting capital improvements, workforce recruitment, and microtransit innovations that connect underserved areas. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, what do you think is the connection between reliable transportation and workforce development, and how will this supplemental budget strengthen that connection?
Well, that is very important to go over. So the voters in 2022, with support from many groups, decided to pass a surcharge tax, which has generated significant amount of revenue to invest in two areas that the Commonwealth wants us to invest in: transportation and education. So many people ask, I always ask people, what do you think is the top ticket item that the Commonwealth spends their money on? And, a lot of people will say education or transportation or the T or roads or public benefits. The number one area where the Commonwealth spends its money on is on healthcare. In fact, 55% of the state budget goes towards healthcare. And that is eating up more and more of the revenue pie each and every year, as we're one of the first states to provide universal health care in the mid-2000s, which has been an enormously successful program for Massachusetts. But it also means that because healthcare continues to take up more of that pie, areas that we want to invest in, like education and transportation, are continuing to get squeezed. And so voters in 2022 recognized the need for additional revenue and passed this so-called millionaire's tax surcharge on earned income over $1 million, not assets, but earned income, that impacting the top 0.1% of Massachusetts residents. And, there was fears when this was passed that revenues would not be steady in this form, and that we might have an exodus of some of our wealthiest earners here in the Commonwealth. That has not been proven to be the case whatsoever. In fact, the greatest growing revenue stream that we have are fair share dollars. But we wanted to be fiscally prudent when we were in the first year of implementing the surcharge. So we were very, very conservative in our estimates and only spent about $1 billion of revenue in the first fiscal year and a little bit more in the second fiscal year. That allowed us, when revenues continued to come in well above projections, to invest even more money in education, in transportation. And so the supplemental budget bill that was passed a couple of weeks ago and sent to Governor Healy, which he signed into law, really builds upon those earlier investments that we did in the annual appropriation to further areas of investments in transportation and education. Massachusetts has a great reputation. We are the #1 state in the country for education, the #1 state in the country for healthcare, the #1 state to be a woman, the #1 state to start a business. What we're not #1 in is in transportation. And that's why it's so dire that we invest heavily in our transportation systems. We have some of the longest commute times in the entire country, particularly in the Boston area. Just yesterday, because of the storms that impacted the eastern seaboard, 93 was flooded. The Massachusetts Turnpike, which I take to Boston several times a week, was basically shut down because of several accidents. I actually turned around in Sturbridge, having been on the road for over an hour, just to get 25 minutes away, and I couldn't get to the city. I was supposed to preside over session. So transportation issues in Massachusetts continue to plague commerce and the ability for people to get to work. That's why investing not just in our roads and bridges, but that need desperate infrastructure improvements, but also our public transportation systems. I was just in the UK a couple weeks ago, and I took the tube in London. which was probably one of the easiest systems to navigate, even though it's probably one of the most used systems in the world. Right now, you can just tap your phone if you have your credit card on there and get in and out. It was one of the easiest systems to navigate. You didn't have to get a card. You didn't have to do anything else. They have invested so heavily in their public transportation system that you can move so easily and freely within London. I was in Edinburgh, Scotland, where I took the tram system that was so user-friendly. I spent nearly 6 days in the UK. I never rode in a car or a bus once. I used public transportation the entire time, including the rail system. Something that's really big for us out here in Western Massachusetts is connecting us by rail to Boston, which is not an easy thing to do. So we've been investing in West East Rail to better connect Pittsfield, Springfield, Palmer, which is in my district and was built on the railroads, and the Worcester area to Boston, so we can be a more integrated economy. And so the investments that we made with this supplemental budget included significant investments in the MBTA, given the challenges that they face. It's the oldest public transit system, subway system in the entire country. And a lot of times, you take it often, it actually shows its age. So investing in that so people can utilize a reliable public transportation system. Out in my area, we don't have the T. So my focus was less investments on the T and more in our regional transportation systems. So in my area, we have PVTA, the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority. There are 14 other transit authorities in the various different regions of Massachusetts that people rely on to get to and from their jobs and to the grocery store and to doctor's appointments. We were able to make a pilot program for free regional transportation, including in PVTA and several other transit authorities, because of the investments that we made in it and expanding lines and access to areas that might not be served right now. The other big area is something called Chapter 90 funding. Chapter 90 funding goes back to our cities and towns so they can update their infrastructure. And it's not just roads and bridges, but it's also things like culverts that aren't often talked about. But if you're not diverting water away from roadways, then you can get in a situation with the extreme weather that we're having exacerbated by climate change that washes out roadways. So investing in those culverts, those sidewalks, those crosswalks, so people can utilize walking and biking as alternative options. Those are all major investments that we made in the supplemental bill, because we understand that while we are leaders in so many different areas, transportation needs continuous investment, because without that, our economy will be impacted. You know, businesses don't want to locate in a place where you can't get there easily. So investing in that transportation infrastructure is essential for our economic growth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And especially when you think about those communities that are a little bit further outside of Boston, that kind of don't really have access to a train or necessarily something that can get them to where they need to go to either get a job or get to work. So yeah, I definitely think, investing in this area is crucial, and connecting these underserved areas will be very helpful in that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Shifting gears towards the education side a little bit, as part of this supplemental budget, $593.5 million will be committed to developing resources for vocational schools, higher education campuses, and students with special needs. So how do you believe investment in schools and adequate resources for students contributes to workforce and economic development?
Well, this is kind of my wheelhouse, Caitlin, having been involved in public higher education and K through 12 education for over a decade. This is a particular passion of mine, and the investments that we've made since the pandemic have been transformative through our education system. We passed something a few years ago called the Student Opportunity Act, which has invested billions of dollars in our K through 12 education system, particularly for our neediest communities. So think of places in my area like Springfield, Holyoke, and Chicopee. Out in the Boston area, obviously Boston, but some of our gateway cities like Lowell and Lawrence and Lynn and Quincy, areas where they don't have the high property values and they need those extra dollars in state support in order to help out. Because of those investments in the Student Opportunity Act that we've made over the last several years, Springfield Public Schools, one of the great beneficiaries of the Student Opportunity Act, was the first school system in all of Massachusetts to provide universal pre-K to every child within the system. And it's the goal of, I know, the Healy administration and myself to expand pre-K education, because it's not just about giving students opportunities, but it's also giving opportunities to their families. And when you look at investments in early childhood education that we've made since the pandemic, they have really tried to increase the affordability of early childhood centers if the public system isn't providing the resources. So giving more grants to families who can afford to send their kids to daycare, and it has an economic benefit of it as well. So if a child is in a high quality pre-K program and getting that great education, their parents are free to pursue their career opportunities. And a lot of families are choosing between whether or not they're going to send their child to a high quality pre-K opportunity or go to work. And families shouldn't have to make that choice. So the investments in early childhood education have been transformative, not just for the students themselves, but also the economic opportunities it gives for their families. And that investment needs to be continued. The investments in public higher education, because of the Fair Share Amendment passage and the investments that were made, we were able to give free community college for the first time in Massachusetts history. And because of that, the closest community college to me, Springfield Technical Community College, is seeing a 40% increase in their student enrollment. That means more students getting associate's degrees, more students getting workforce training and certificate programs in high need fields, and not taking on that crippling debt that so many students take on that further delays their opportunity to do things like buy a home and buy a car and start a family. So providing free community college education to every student in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is a definite game changer. But it also includes investing in our public colleges and universities and our campuses in general. And so most of our community colleges, state universities, and UMass system, they have aging infrastructure. The number one area of state assets and state buildings are our public colleges and universities. So we dedicated in this last supplemental fair share budget bill, $115 million for deferred maintenance issues for our public higher education campuses, all 29 public colleges and universities. And that capital investment can transform those campuses so they can have the quality labs that are needed for their programs, the that are needed in order to help students get ahead. That's going to be transformative, because that $115 million is set in a revolving fund that allows us to accrue interest over it and allows for capital improvements over the next decade. It is something that I worked on when I worked for the state university system, something I fought for as a student at Framingham State. So it's great that we've included this in the supplemental bill to invest in it. The other area of public higher education, it's actually the bill that I filed for several sessions. We invest in something called the Endowment Match Program. And the Endowment Match Program, set at $20 million in the supplemental budget bill, gives money out to public colleges and universities who raise money from donors, and the Commonwealth will match that dollar for dollar, meaning that if a donor comes in and invests, donates $1,000, means the Commonwealth will match it with another $1,000, taking that $1,000 donation and turning it into a $2,000 donation. That is something that is really, really transformative to public colleges and universities, because it goes right back to students. Even though community college is free, those grants will allow students at UMass and our state universities like Framingham State that I went to get the scholarships needed in order to get ahead. And then the last area that we invested in, because there were so many on the education front that we could, is in the area of career and technical education grants. So $100 million to expand the capacity and accommodate additional career and technical education education opportunities for students in the K through 12 system. That, coupled with support for things like special education costs, which are really outpacing the rate of inflation, those investments are significant for our school districts. They're significant for our economic opportunities and significant for our employers here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, totally. I think you summed up a lot of issues related to education and really highlighted how they're interlaced quite well. And I'm glad you care about these things because, like you mentioned, the success of one student impacts far more than just that individual. Access to childcare, early childhood education, higher education, all those things translate to positive economic development. I read your most recent newsletter, and you shared that last month you joined Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll and Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development Lauren Jones for your first Mass Hire State Workforce Board meeting. So I'd love to hear why you believe the efforts of our Mass Hire Workforce Boards across Massachusetts are crucial in aligning workforce strategies with the Commonwealth's economic needs.
Well, one of the benefits of being chair of the Labor and Workforce Committee is that you also have seats on various different boards and commissions. And the Mass Hire Workforce Board, is very important. And having these meetings quarterly circulating across the state. We were up in Lowell, and it brings together members of the business community, higher education, municipal leaders, mayors, and municipal leaders from across Massachusetts, with legislators like myself. It's chaired by Lieutenant Governor Driscoll was there, and chaired by Secretary Jones from the Labor and Workforce Development Executive Office. Really gets at the heart of it. And the thing that I'm most impressed by this board is that they're really focusing on the regional economies of Massachusetts.6obviously, workforce boards are critical for our economic future, but they're located in various different regions. There's, half a dozen or so of them that are located throughout us, and we're actually getting studies about the economic needs of particular regions. When people tend to think of Massachusetts, they tend to gravitate towards the Boston area. It's not. Our economy is a regional economy in Massachusetts. Out in Western Massachusetts, some of the big industries are healthcare and in higher education. Those are my two largest employers for my district are Bay State Health, which has about 5,000 employees that live in my district. And the second largest employer is UMass Amherst. Even though it's not located in my district, a lot of my residents are employed by it. But there's also unique needs for regions as well. So in my region, advanced manufacturing, making things. We continue to build products and make things in Western Massachusetts. We have numerous high-skilled machine shops that are bustling and looking for employees. So the benefits of this workforce, Mass Hire Workforce Boards, is that we take things in a regional approach, and we understand the needs of each in particular region, work with those boards locally, and try to invest in areas that can grow ourselves economically. So I'm just so pleased to be on that board and to join with Secretary Jones and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll to really focus in on the regional nature of our economies.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into my next question. In our region of Metro North, we serve several populations, all facing unique barriers to employment, like youth, English language learners, immigrants, low-income households, older workers, and more. So how do you think we can better align future statewide workforce development strategies to more effectively support these communities?
Well, I think, our population in Massachusetts is aging rapidly. And the fastest growing population that's taking up that aging population are immigrant workers, in first year English language learners. So providing opportunities, particularly for immigrant communities, to get the workforce training that they need to be self-sufficient and to support their families, something that we need to invest in. We have great programs in my region, which I know best. So Holyoke Community College, which is not far away from us, has the Adult Learning Center, where it takes mostly first-generation Americans and teaches them about Massachusetts, about the needs, gives them opportunities to learn English. We actually had Secretary Jones in Holyoke a couple months ago to look at some of the work that they're doing in high needs fields, things like healthcare and home health aides, growing professions where we definitely need some investments in. And so looking to give opportunities to these English language learners, immigrants, low income household, and people who might be changing, older workers. You know, we do have an aging population, but people are tending to work longer and longer and have the opportunity to contribute longer and longer. So making sure that we give opportunities, not just to, you know, the teens and 20 somethings, but also to people that are middle career, like my parents, and the opportunities that they had, or people that are later on in their career that continue to want to give back and earn an income and to be employed. I think there are strategies that we can work on as a Commonwealth to uplift all of those populations so they get the skills, the tools that they need in order to get and sustain employment. That's all part of what Massachusetts should be doing. And what makes Massachusetts an attractive place to be is making sure that we have these programs available to give people those opportunities. And it's really troubling right now to see the federal government continuing to cut back on programs that have helped so many people get ahead. And so it's my hope that here in Massachusetts, we can be a beacon of light for the rest of the other 49 states to show them that what we do here in Massachusetts is invest in our future, invest in our workers, invest in our people who have just moved here, and making sure that older generations have opportunities to continue to be employed.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Thinking about federal funding cuts, so after the U.S. Department of Labor's decision to cut funding for Job Corps, I read that you addressed members of the press at last month's Westover Job Corps graduation, asking them to speak plainly, saying, quote, "The Department of Labor's decision to cut funding for Job Corps is unconstitutional and a grave mistake. This move turns its back on the very individuals and families who rely on Job Corps for a path forward, young people striving for economic mobility, career readiness, and a better life." So during this time when funding is at risk for workforce development programs and initiatives, how do you believe public officials, constituents, and organizations can best advocate for these causes?
We need to speak out. We need to use our voices collectively and send a strong signal to decision makers in Washington, D.C. that these programs are vital for our economic future. Job Corps centers, there are 3 of them in Massachusetts. One located in my district on Westover Air Force Base provides opportunities for 16 to 24-year-olds who might not have opportunities to actually get ahead. It provides things like housing. Many of the 300 or so plus students that are enrolled in the Job Corps program at Westover, without it, would otherwise be homeless, living on our streets, couch surfing. So making sure that we continue to keep these Job Corps centers open is essential, not just for economic opportunities, but also to meet some of the housing demands and crisis that we're facing here in Massachusetts. I think probably one of the most poignant examples was actually uttered at their graduation a few weeks ago, when one student who was getting a certificate in a program that will lead to a job said, "Without Job Corps programs, I don't know where my life would be." And he basically said, "Job Corps saved my life." And so seeing that this administration in Washington, D.C. is unilaterally cutting, without even going to Congress, these types of programs is clearly unconstitutional, not just unconscionable. And the federal courts agreed with that. They have placed a stay on the closure of these Job Corps programs, the 3 in Massachusetts, but we need to continue to keep the advocacy up on these issues. A lot of students that are enrolled in Job Corps programs don't really have the means to advocate in Washington, D.C. So that's why we need to continue to work with our federal delegation. That's been amazing, from Senator Warren and Senator Markey to our members of Congress that have continued to push against this administration in the cuts to these programs that are vital for populations, vital to provide housing, vital to provide workforce development and training so people can get a job and become self-sufficient. Cutting out these types of programs could have dire consequences to our economic vitality where these job corps centers are located. And it's not just the people that are going to school there, it's the 200 plus employees that work at these job corps centers. If they close, they're out of a job, and that adds to our unemployment. We need to do everything that we can to uplift people and continue to advocate at the federal level to keep these vital programs open.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you shared that, unique story to that person who spoke at the graduation, because I think a lot of times those real stories hit home the most, because I think it makes the issues appear more real, and it demonstrates how these decisions are impacting real lives. Leading into my next question, with the evolution of technology, mobile platforms have become a main way of consuming news media. And so I'd love to hear how you advise media consumers, especially young media consumers, to be consuming accurate information, stay hopeful, and get involved in advocating for change.
Yeah, and it is really difficult. It's like drinking from a fire hose right now. The
Yeah.
misinformation that is spread on social media platforms. I usually tell people, don't just read a meme that you see and take it as fact. You need to look beyond that. There are sources of media that have biases, skewed to political directions. There's a great chart that's put out by a couple of universities that looks at each media outlet and shows where they lean on the bias chart. So take a look. I encourage people to take a look at that. Find people that find news sources that don't have too extreme of a bias, and just basically put out information that isn't really accurate or factually true, but just adds to your own personal bias. And we're all guilty of it at some level. So I encourage people to go to news sources that tend to be more reputable and have a better reputation. But even that is being called into question now. The paper of record, the New York Times, which is used if you go to a college or university, it is the paper of record. It is, something that you can source. That is an excellent newspaper. However, it's very expensive for people to actually purchase articles from. I encourage people to look at some of the free sites, things like NPR, which I listen to every morning. There are some that don't agree, even though it's a pretty unbiased news outlet. There are some people that say that it's biased, but when you look at that chart, NPR is pretty middle of the road when it comes to their reporting. The other real factual news source that's out there is the AP, the Associated Press. They tend not to have the in-depth coverage that some people are looking for, but they can give you a good factual representation of what is actually happening through politics, through the media. And so I would encourage people to go and look at some of those sites that don't lean too far to the right or too far to the left, and really get out some of the issues that people need to know to make informed decisions, to be good voters and to be good citizens. So I always encourage young people, look beyond the social media memes, look towards reputable sources, look at that media's and biases chart, and get something that is factually true. And if you're looking for more in-depth information, there are great publications that exist that you can find out some more in-depth coverage.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because social media algorithms today are created to kind of reaffirm your pre-existing biases and give you things that they know you already agree with. And so I think
crazy.
It creates these echo chambers of like individual little bubbles of comfort, and it's really important to be able to hear other people's perspectives. And
It's incredible what our phones pick up too and how that algorithm impacts things. I mean, myself, I get stories all the time that kind of feed to my biases, but they also do interesting things. So my girlfriend, who's actually a faculty member at Springfield Technical Community College, so community colleges are very important to me because I hear it from her all the time. She actually bears a striking resemblance to Penny from The Big Bang Theory, the actress Kaylee Coco, I think her name is, who I've
Uh-huh.
never looked up or watched the show before, but because there are pictures of Amy on my phone that look like her, I get all sorts of pictures on my social media of Kaylee Coco because they think I have her in there because she bears that resemblance. So it's incredible what our phones can pick up and the algorithms that they can get. And even saying those words out loud, your phones pick it up and direct you to information like that.
Yeah, it's scary. It's
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 wild.
quite
It's wild.
advanced. I have a couple questions left if you have time.
Sure.
Um, so I read your article in an April issue of the Town Reminder, giving readers a behind the scenes look at how masks make laws. And one quote you included from Reverend Jesse Jackson really stood out to me. He said, "Democracy works best when we work together. Let's turn to each other, not on each other." So I'd love if you could expand on how you interpret this message and why you believe it's so important.
I think the message of a democracy and the health of a democracy is based not just on people who are in elective office of just spouting our own opinions, but it takes a well-educated and engaged citizenry for our democracy to operate. So I try to utilize every opportunity that I can to demystify politics and the legislative process and state issues that are happening at the state house and how it impacts people's lives. So whether it was, the articles that I've shared in the reminders and some of the local publications that I have in my district or my newsletter, I try to focus on a little bit of an education piece to try to say that, we're not just sitting there in Boston doing our own thing and passing laws that were only developed in by us or by working with different advocacy groups, but by engaging the citizenry, by saying that you have a voice. Began this podcast by talking about how in Massachusetts anybody can testify on any piece of legislation before a committee hearing, making sure that the public knows about that your voice can be heard, that your elected officials can hear from you directly. We don't have, these big, apparatuses. I do office hours in each one of the 12 communities in my district once a month. When you email me, I see the email. If you, call our office, my staff will update me on what you called about. So we're pretty accessible. And I think the public needs to understand that. And that leads to that working together notion. And in having a well-educated citizenry, having an engaged citizenry is healthy for our democracy. It's essential for it. And so anything that I can do as an elected official with my constituents to give them access to the legislature and to their state government is something that I try to do. Each year, the state Senate runs a citizens legislative seminar where each senator can nominate a couple of individuals from their district to spend 2 days at the State House to go over how a bill becomes a law, to go over the process, to meet with elected officials, to meet with decision makers and engage with them, and how citizens can be better prepared to engage in their democracy. I think those are great things that we do here in Massachusetts. One of the ways that I got involved with politics was actually my senior year of high school when Massachusetts does something each spring called Student Government Day, where students from school districts across Massachusetts come to the State House and sit in the seats of their state senators or state reps of the Supreme Judicial Court, the Governor's Council, our constitutional officers, and spend a day doing the work that we do. I think opportunities like that demystifies the legislative process, demystifies politics, which can be extraordinarily confusing, and it also lends to getting people more engaged in their democracy.
Yeah, totally. I think especially today in such, a volatile state, you could say, in the country, I think people can feel paralyzed because there's so many scary headlines and often bad news coming out everywhere. And so understanding how you can actually make a difference and work with your local government, I think is very important to staying hopeful and making change because I really agree. I think the foundation of democracy is its people.
Mhm.
Um, so my last question, it's more of a fun question, but I know you were born and raised in Ludlow and still reside there today. So I wanted to know if listeners are ever to find themselves in town, what's one thing that they have to check out while they're there?
Well, I don't know if you could tell that I was from Ludlow by my background, the big Ludlow sign right behind my desk, but I
Yeah.
am a fourth generation Ludlow resident. My family immigrated from Portugal and Poland on my mom's side, the Polish side, my dad's side, the Portuguese side, a little bit over 110 years ago, and settled right here in Ludlow to work in our Ludlow Mills, which was the largest jute factory in the entire world. So the twine and rope, those fibers are called jute, and those factories operated for many, many decades. That's why my family came here, worked in those factories, or lived in factory housing that was near there. But those factories became dormant a few decades ago. And we were able to invest significantly in the redevelopment using state dollars that I was, so privileged to get the opportunity to invest in, to transform those mills. And right now, that transformation has led to great improvements, including a beautiful river walk that stretches right along the Chicopee River that separates Ludlow from Springfield and Wilbraham. Check out the river walk in the old mills, and you can see the history markers of Ludlow as you go on that river walk. We also have
Cool.
some great breweries in town. One brewery that's located right in the Ludlow Mills is Iron Duke Brewery. We also have right up the road Vanish Valley Brewery. So our great local micro breweries that provide great tasty treats, and they have great food there too. So if you're not a beer drinker or a seltzer drinker, they have food trucks that are there. They have pizza machines. They are great stops to go to along that journey. And then the other thing is a kind of a cultural event that goes to my Portuguese heritage. And so every Labor Day weekend, we have something called the annual Our Lady of Fatima Festa. And from Thursday till Monday over Labor Day weekend, we bring in thousands of people from not just across the region or the Northeast, but people from Canada, people from other countries will come here and participate and enjoy the cultural aspects of having Portuguese food. There is a religious component to it, but you don't have to be Catholic or religious to enjoy all the food, the amusements, the beauty of a candlelight procession. We do that every Labor Day weekend. Something great to see here in the town of Ludlow. And we have some amazing restaurants that are right here, including Tandem Bagel that just opened along the Riverwalk, which is a local bagel company, has several locations in our area, just opened up an outdoor patio. We also have some great Portuguese food and several restaurants that are here in town. We have an awesome sushi place, and never thought that sushi would be, a Ludlow thing in a blue collar community, but some of the best sushi is right down the road at Blue Water Sushi. If anybody wants to come out to Ludlow, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll wear my tour guide hat and give you some recommendations.
Great. Yeah. Hey, I'm sold. That sounds like a great time. Oh, those are all my questions. If you have anything else, feel free to add, but
No, just thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for doing this, putting it together and trying to, educate, your listeners about the legislative process, what we're doing in the Labor and Workforce Committee, and the investments we're trying to make in order to help people find employment and stay employed.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin.